Hey everybody, Jordan Rosenberg here again from Bierman Law. And today I'm joined by an old friend and compatre, new connection, new old connection, Adam Pollack. And Adam, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, man. It's good to see you.
Absolutely, likewise. And so the reason I reconnected with Adam and decided that we should do some collaboration is because Adam, in his very entrepreneurial lifestyle, and he'll tell you about it. He's got a very active social media page on parenting hacks. And of course, in my world, I deal with children in transition. And so I think Adam's advice, his content, and the way that he kind of views things is really cool. And I think really helpful for at least my clients and just parents basically worldwide. So, Adam, awesome, stoked. And I think that this how to win the week in 3 minutes is the most profound thing that you've done. So tell us a little bit about kind of where who you are, how you got here, and why parenting hack is so important to you.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So to back up, the reason we're together is because Jordan and I went to high school together, and then we kind of branched off, lived our lives, and then fortunately got reconnected pretty recently. And yeah, so I kind of started down a normal path. I did consulting for a little bit and worked at a large company, and then found myself at a smaller company doing sales, and I sort of liked the smaller environment. And then I went super small and started my own company a year or two later. And that just sent me down kind of like 10 years of various entrepreneurial journeys. I started doing some stuff in consumer packaged food. And then I started a consulting company and just found that I worked really well working for myself. So yeah, I did that for about 10 years, and along the way got married, had a couple kids, and found myself trying to be an entrepreneur and trying to be a parent, and finding that those two things were kind of in tension a lot. And in talking with friends and other people in my neighborhood who had kids, like the idea of working and parenting are always at odds. Like your employer always wants you to work more. You always want to be a better parent. Like there's just a constant tension. And so I just found that
Welcome to my life, right?
yeah. So
Yeah.
so like this resonated with a lot of people, and I had spent a lot of time actually like doing content marketing for other people, for other businesses, and realized like, oh, like I can take a lot of those principles and weave them into my own story. And so I thought I had like a unique perspective in that I was trying to hustle, trying to start businesses, and then trying to be a great parent at the same time. And I thought I was reading, consuming a lot of information that'd be really useful. It was useful to me and my family, and it'd be useful to others. So I started publishing it. And so that's kind of what happened about a year or so ago. I started a newsletter called The Juggle, and the whole idea is like I provide tips for working parents, and those are our parenting tips and also some business tips or mindset tips, productivity tips, and then just like fun stuff I find on the internet. But the idea is like every Sunday, I try to do just a little bit of planning to help set up my week. I spend like 10 minutes thinking about like what needs to get done and then mapping it out. And that just made a big difference for me. And I do a lot of reading and kind of like do things to just get into the right mindset. And so I try to capture some of that and put it in this newsletter that goes out every Sunday. And then I do a lot of short form stuff on Instagram as well. And it also sort of like spans the gamut of like parenting tips and hacks and things that I found, along with like business things that I actually feel there's a lot of crossover. Like I'll read something in a business context and be like, oh, that's like great for parents. Or I'll read something in a parenting context and realize like, oh, that can totally be translated to business. So
Yep.
that's how I come here is like I'm not a child psychologist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an expert in any way other than I am in the thick of it with a 4.5-year-old and a 3-year-old every day. And I just read a ton of stuff and I share the good stuff. So I share the studies that I think are really impactful or important around, kids' mental health, or I share the 70-year study, the longest running study on human development that's been going on, for 70 years across 70,000 kids. So yeah, when I see something that personally piques my interest, I'm pretty confident it, will pique the interest of other working parents. And so I try and share that, put it into a format that's really easy and digestible. And so that's how I spend a lot of my days.
Yeah, and I think even just kind of what you're doing is just the digestibility of it and the relatability of it,
Yeah.
not only to working parents, to parents, but even parents who are in transitions that are trying to find some consistency. I mean, what you provide, and even though you're not an expert in psychology or anything like that, is you've accumulated all this knowledge and are just giving it to people in digestible bites. And frankly, I've seen a lot of your stuff. I'm thinking to myself during, obviously, I'm thinking to myself when you're giving these examples and these parenting hacks. And, there's a lot of translation in between just kind of like these almost like common sense type things. And if you really boil it down, I mean, to me, it's like they're common sense, they're great tips, but they're just not on the top of your mind because you're scattered, you're elsewhere, you're not thinking about it, you're not thinking about the mechanics and the machine that's spitting these things out. So I guess give me from your perspective, I know it's kind of putting you on the spot. I deal with a lot of parents who are working. I deal with a lot of parents who are, beside themselves, distracted in terms of dealing with a divorce, dealing with a co-parent, dealing with other issues in their life. Give us the top 3 best parenting hacks from your perspective that you find most relatable and cleanest in terms of implementing in your day-to-day life.
Yeah. Okay. So I think one thing is like it's simpler than you think. I think in general, parents want to do a lot more for their kids. They want to get them more things. They want to spend more time with them. In general, I think quality is always better than quantity. So one thing I really like to do is I like to spend, so there's 3 points of the day that are really important for your kids. So when they wake up, when they go to sleep, and usually when you pick them up, drop them off from school, but let's just say pick them up, because those are the times they're seeing you after a separation.
Right.
Right. So like
Yep.
if they're seeing you in the morning, they've just been asleep. If they're seeing you after school, they've been at school for 8 hours. And then if they're going to bed, they're not going to see you for 8 hours, 10 hours.
Right. I
So
mean, that's the extent of the transition in any working parent, if they go to daycare or school. I mean,
yeah.
that's when you see your kids.
So like those 3 to 5 minutes, first thing in the morning, right before you drop them off, or sorry, right when you pick them up and right before bed are really, really important.
Yeah.
And I try really, really hard to not be on my phone, to be like 100% present, to be very warm, to listen. Like this morning, my son's been having like a string of nightmares. This morning he woke up and he was like pumped because he had some like really funny dreams. He was like sharing the dreams with me. We had a good laugh about it. It was a really sweet moment. And that's not to say like the morning didn't still devolve into like craziness, but it felt really, really good for those 5 minutes. And I think in general, yeah, the instinct is like, I don't spend enough time with my kids, so I'm going to shower them in gifts. I'm going to try and spend more time, but like distracted time. I think especially if you're dealing with a divorce, if you're working, if you're busy, if things are crazy, focus on those little pockets of time. I heard Jerry Seinfeld talk about this. He talks about like, how everyone wants to spend quality time with their kids. And he's like, no, I want the garbage time. He's like, I want eating a bowl of ice cream at 9 o'clock at night, sitting at the counter, hanging out. I want those little bits. It's like the stuff that, isn't a big activity, isn't a party, isn't whatever. It's just the think about it as like the time in between. Really focus on those bits. So for me, that's what I focus on, because my kid spends more time at school than they do with me, more time at school and asleep than they do with me. So
Yep.
I think that's like one big thing, is just like focus on those really important pockets of time, and know that those are hard transitions for kids. So like your undivided attention is really important.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I think it's
let me pause you, Ed. So I think that's an awesome observation, and really important to implement, because I think just even with a working parent being distracted with email or a text message, or getting something from a co-parent, or dealing with a divorce, like your mobile device, like that you said, is like the number one distractor. I'm very guilty of it with my children also, but to have that presentness, no distraction with the garbage time, like Seinfeld says.
Yeah.
Those are added, like, not only is it important for your kids because you're there, you're present, you're with them. That's always what I tell my clients is like, regardless of the number of hours that you have with your kids, right? It's about those minutes where you can be present and with them and engage. And so to me, like summing that all up is almost just like, keep it simple, eliminate distractions, and be present with your kids.
And I think focus on those 3 points of the day that like where transition's tough for a kid.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about hacks, one thing that I just found out about that I think is genius. So like I find myself getting sucked into my phone a lot, and it makes sense because it's like super colorful and it's like a slot machine. You want to keep pulling it.
Yeah.
There's an accessibility feature where you can basically turn your phone black and white.
Oh, wow.
And what it does is basically like you get far less dopamine by looking at your phone when it's black and white, and so you kind of start looking at it and you're like, I can put this down now.
Right.
I
Yeah.
can, and I can show you guys, I can give you the like how to set up that shortcut. But I found that that's like been a big thing for me, and just being disinterested in my phone is like when I know I'm getting sucked in, I turn it to black and white, and then it's like, okay, set it down. So that's
Yeah.
like a little thing. I think so. You asked me for three. So second thing is, yeah. So I think quality, not quantity. I think simple. So one of my favorite studies is this 70-year study they've done it's the longest running study on human development history. It was done in the UK. It's across 70,000 kids from all different ethnicities, all different socioeconomic backgrounds. And what they found was there were two main learnings from a 70-year experiment. One is that if you're born into poverty, you have a much harder likelihood of having a stable, successful adulthood. So that's just an unfortunate reality. It's not to say it's not possible, but that was like one thing. Second thing though was the biggest thing that mattered in a kid's trajectory was parenting, and it's parenting in sort of the most basic contexts you can think of. So the 5 or 6 things that mattered were like, were you warm with your kid? Did you listen to them? Did you let it be known that you had like intentions for their future, that you like, you kind of prop them up, said like, hey, you're gonna do big things? Did you like read to them regularly? Did they have a regular bedtime? All of the things that you and I would deem as like, yeah, that's stupid simple. But
Yep.
I think the point here is we now have unlimited access to information. You go on social media and there's 150 people you follow, all of whom tell you to do different things. And that's incredibly overwhelming. You don't need to listen to that. A lot of that is noise. You need to do the basics. You need to do like whatever your intuition is around like, should I do this thing for my kid? Like, and the answer is yes. Like those are the things you should be doing. It's not about like gluten or vaccinations or some of these things that have become like political hot button things. It's way more about the very, very basic things, like, treating your kid the way you would want to be treated. And like I said, that doesn't need to be spending 6 hours a day with them. That can be 10 minutes. You can do all of those things in 10 minutes. You can read them a book and interact with them in a way where they feel like their cup is getting filled up. So I think that's a big thing. It's like, it's not a hack as much as it's like hey, you're probably doing a better job than you think.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to get swept up in the noise and don't, because the studies show that all of this stuff that we get swept up in, playing Mozart in the crib, like over a long enough basis of time, it really doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's another good observation. And I think that, again, boiling it down is quality over quantity. Right. Yeah. And also, like, I think that study really teaches us, at least from our perspective, in my world, conflict is so pervasive, not only between parents, but then a lot of the times, a parent's decision to involve that child in the conflict.
Yeah.
I mean, that study just sort of reaffirms that's the opposite way that you should go, right? Because they're so impressionable on what conflict is and examples that are being set, dynamics and dichotomy between mom and dad or partner and partner. It is so important to parent, like you said, in a very meaningful, quality way, because that's the example that you're setting for your kids, and that's that time that's making the most on them. So, that to me, I think is really important.
Yeah, and sort of an offshoot of that is like the tone in which you talk to your kid obviously matters a ton, but the things you say to your kid matter a ton. And this is something I heard, like the way you talk to your kid becomes their inner voice, and also becomes the way they talk to other kids.
Interesting.
So, if you're warm with them, if you, obviously teach them, do your best to teach them manners, if you teach them about hope and about like how, like, I think that's a big thing, is like, we want to try and shield our kids from pain and hardship, but the reality is that doesn't help them at all. The key is helping them understand, like, hey, life has ups and downs. Life is hard. Things are going to be sad. Things are going to be good. Mm-hmm. But you're strong enough to withstand that. Like you can handle that. Or like, hey, you don't, like, your kid's mad because they don't know how to ride their bike yet. It's not like, oh, you're great, you can do it. It's like, no, you just need some more practice. Like, let's work on this together. Right. So there's a lot that I've learned around like how you communicate with a kid, and you realize, like, hey, like our parents are doing the best they could, but they probably weren't doing this. And that is probably why, our generation has some issues. And probably why their generation had issues, because their parents definitely weren't doing it. So I think that the big thing is, like, you always want to take a step back and realize like your kid is this like ball of clay that is being
Yeah.
molded
Right.
actively.
Yeah.
And it's happening over a very long time horizon. So like I hesitate to use the word hacks because people want, when they think hack, they think like this works in minutes.
Yeah.
Like you have, when with a kid, it's like this is the ultimate marathon, right? Like you're
Mhm.
parenting for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So these changes that we're making now, they make a big impact the earlier you make them, but they happen over a long period of time. So
Mhm.
like that's the hard part, is like parenting, like your boss is your kid and your kid is crazy. And so it's really hard to get feedback on whether or not you're doing is working, but just know that like over a long enough time horizon, this stuff works. Like that,
Right.
the basic fundamental things, like taking a step back and thinking about like how would I have wanted to be treated? How do I wish my parents would have talked to me? Like, do I wish they would have provided me more support?
Yeah.
I saw this great video. It's actually like the one of the last videos on my Instagram that I kind of put my own feedback on. There's a great account called Chasing Sage. It's like a dad and his daughter snowboards, and you've probably seen the videos. They were like on Good Morning America. It's like he mic'd up his daughter who was snowboarding, and she was super cute. But
Mhm.
his daughter takes a big fall, and like he doesn't panic. He slows down, and then he like takes a deep breath. You can see him. He's like, "Whoa, you took a big fall. Are you okay?" He doesn't say,
Yeah.
"You're okay. Get up, get up, get up." You know, he just takes a pause, and I think like that's such a huge thing. It's really hard to do, especially when your kid's in a situation where they're about to get hurt. But
Yeah.
like that is it, right? Like so much of how your kid reacts, how they behave is an offshoot of your own, like how you carry yourself, your own
And your
emotions,
reactions. Right.
your reactions. Your kids, your kids eventually will listen to what you say, but in general, they more so than anything, they follow what you do. And so if you're someone who's a calm, strong presence, who's supportive, who listens, chances are your kid is going to be that too over a long enough time horizon. So I think that that's a big thing, is just like it's the basics. It's what you probably
Yeah.
think you should be doing, that you should continue to do. It just won't happen overnight, and that's okay. Like
Yeah.
that.
And two things to that. I mean, a lot of the times, Adam, like, I mean, you have this wealth of knowledge. I mean, you've read the articles, you've done the research. I mean, like bringing that to a practical level, right? And yes, I think it's more of a hack than even what you're saying, because it involves actual thinking about this and implementing it, right?
Yeah.
And in the day-to-day, nonsense of the day and the monotony of the day and the aggravators of the day and the stresses of the day, you're just thinking about what your kid needs for dinner, right?
Yeah.
And how quickly can you get dinner on the table? How quickly can you get them through the bath time, get them through? I mean, my house from 4:30 to 7:30, I mean, it's madness, right?
Total chaos.
It's
Total
get
chaos.
everybody to bed. I just want to be able to sit on the couch for 5 minutes and eat my dinner as quickly as I can, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think to me, it's like the hack is just reminding yourself and taking time to understand how you're acting towards your
Yeah.
children, exercising that patience, right? And then thinking
Yep.
really critically about how your behaviors, even in those minute situations where someone gets hurt, how are you reacting? What is your messaging? What is your tone? How is that being reflected on you? And how are you portraying that, how they should handle something like that in the future? So
Yeah. So I would say I've got two sort of strategies or like perspective shifting exercises that I do that help me a ton with that.
yeah,
Because we're all human. Like you're going to yell at your kids. You're going to say stuff to them that you don't want to say. I do. Like Jordan, you do. We
of
all do.
course.
It happens.
Yep.
The key there is when you do, you apologize and you explain what you're going to do differently next time. So like, I'm sorry I yelled at you. That wasn't right. We don't yell at each other here. And next time I'm going to take a minute, calm myself down. So I think like that's a big thing, is like no one's perfect.
Yep.
So, and this is where like you think about like if your boss ever yelled at you and they did something like that, you'd have a lot more respect for them than if they just
Right.
yelled at you. And if your boss yelled at you 10 times a day, every day, I venture, I guess you probably wouldn't work there for long, or you wouldn't want to, wouldn't feel like
Yep.
a good environment.
Right.
So if you're in the business of like yelling at your kid daily, just like think about it. It sucks for you, but it sucks for them too. So,
Yeah.
so something's broken there. And that's where it's like, you got to figure that out.
Yeah.
But that's like a big thing, is like knowing that you're going to screw up and knowing that that's okay, and figuring out like how to make that right. So but the two things I do to try and give myself perspective, there's two like pretty simple exercises. One is sort of like out of stoicism. So if you ever read like anything by Epictetus, who's sort of like a famous stoicist, um every morning when I wake up, before I even get out of bed, I basically say to myself, things aren't going to go your way today. Like, you're not going to get everything done that you think you're going to get done. You're going to face challenges. There are going to be setbacks. There are going to be problems that you aren't expecting. And that's okay. That's life. Like,
Yeah.
there is no world in which your problems magically go away. Everyone likes to think if I made this amount more money, or if I had this job, that my problems would go away. No, you just have new problems. So know that problems are actually a good thing. Everyone's life, like the richest people in the world, have problems. Their problems are different, but they have problems. So know that like, you're going to have problems, face them. And that way, if your day happens to go the way you want it to, you think it does, like, you have won. You're like, holy cow, like, I set my expectations low. I cleared them. Today was great. And then when shit does hit the fan, which is inevitable, you're like, okay, I literally had a conversation with myself about it this morning. Yep. And most of my days are the latter. Like, whatever, like, my kid's sick, it doesn't go to daycare, or who knows, like, I was planning to get this one thing done, and then I got pulled in 15 directions. I didn't get it done. So know that that's like, once again, that's every single person on the planet is fighting that battle, which is, they have a plan for the day. The plan never goes according to plan. Doesn't.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yep. And I mean, even in my world, I think, again, it's like, when you actually think about what you're saying, right? It's setting expectations for yourself, of others. And, what we always say is, it's basically plan for the worst, hope for the best.
Yeah.
If you have expectations that, your day's going to go bad, and there's going to be things that are going to happen, or not necessarily bad, but there's things that might surprise you during your day, and something doesn't surprise you, then you've had a pretty good day, right?
Yeah.
And either way, I mean, it's the same thing in a parenting relationship with your children. I think setting expectations, even in a divorce, extremely important. And I think that really exemplifies what you were saying too.
Yeah, I think so. I chuck both of these tips up into just perspective. Like, so parenting is not about perfection. Life is not about perfection. It's not possible. Parenting is all about perspective. Your kid, if you're letting your kids get you upset, that's on you. That's not on your kids. That's like, you are letting your kids dictate your emotions. And that's on you. So if you have the right perspective, if you realize, like, no, my kid, no matter what they do, they cannot upset me. Or I'm allowed to be upset, but I don't have to take that out on my kids. I know that I need to walk away.
Yep.
Then you're good. But most of it stems from feeling totally out of control, because you're feeling, basically stretched to the max, and feeling like you can't even think to take a second to pause, to walk yourself away. Yeah. But in general, your kid doesn't have the power to make you upset. You have the power to make yourself upset. So the thing I like to do a lot, when all hell is breaking loose in my house, is I like, or for example, we were in Target, and my son had like a insane meltdown. Like, we had to leave, and it went on for 45 minutes. But one of the things that I like to do is that I pretend, when that happens and it seems like your world is about to collapse, I think about, like, okay, pretend I'm 80 years old. So like, I'm shooting forward into the future, 50 years. I get to come back in time for 45 minutes. I get to be my 35-year-old self for 45 minutes, but it's just for this meltdown. Would I do that? Would I be willing to, would I want to go back in time?
Right.
And everyone you talk to says, oh yeah, absolutely. Because you'd much rather be 35 than 85. Time is basically your most precious commodity. Mm-hmm. And you realize, like, the stuff that feels really acute and horrible and like it's going to kill you is the stuff that in 10, 20, 50 years, you're really going to miss. You're going to miss your kid being a child, right? You're going to miss the meltdowns, because now you're old and you're sick. Your kids are grown up. They don't need you anymore. So it's like the ultimate, like, it stops you in your tracks, because you're like, okay, so even though this isn't fun, this is like a part of the process. Right. And with the right perspective, I can actually figure out how to enjoy this, because if I were my grandparents right now, I wish I could be me. And so that's like a thing I do probably multiple times a day. And then I try and think about, like, how, if this were like fun or funny, what would it be? So then I'm like, okay, my kid's having a meltdown. Everyone's freaking out. Like, I'll start laughing, right? Or I'll start dancing, or I'll do something. Cause it's like, wait, my kid's like, why are you dancing? And all of a sudden he's dancing, and then we're good again. Right. So just know, like, that these things are short, really, really short, like the wave, right? Yeah. Getting upset about your kid being upset would be like getting upset every time the sun goes down. Like, this is like, so you just need to look at it like that. Like, your kids behavior is like weather.
Yeah.
And got upset every time the weather was bad, you'd be a miserable person. So
Yeah.
instead, just know that there's no such thing as bad weather. Rain can be great, sun can be great, snow can be great.
It's part of the process.
Part of the process, and
Right.
know that even if the weather's bad today, it could be good tomorrow. So that's like the main thing is like detaching from the fact that like your kids' feelings are not your feelings, and then giving yourself some perspective, which is like, this could actually be an awesome thing if I were 50 years older. So like, okay, like let's transport to that place for 20 minutes while this storm, basically rains itself out.
Right.
So I think that's like a big thing. It's not, once again, not a silver bullet, but it's just about understanding that like you have the control. Like it doesn't ever feel like that. It never feels like you're in control as a parent, but you ultimately have control. And whether it's your kids or a coworker who you hate or a boss who you hate, like you're in control of how that, that person makes you feel. Obviously, if someone makes you feel bad enough, long enough, you leave. But in general, you get to the perspective, like you can't control like 95% of what happens in the world. You can control perspective every single day. So with the right perspective, you could win every day if you want to, but it's hard. It's a hard thing to like, wrap your brain around when it feels like.
Yeah. I mean, that's very profound. And, one of the things that I always tell my clients is, again, a lot of stress, a lot of everything going on. Perspective is key. And really, you can really only control the things that you can control. And that's your perspective and how you react to certain things. Right.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Can't change others. I mean, when we're talking about kids, your behaviors have an effect on your children. Right.
Yeah.
But in any relationship, your behaviors have an effect on the reaction. Right.
Yeah.
If I was a complete, what to you, you're not going to like me, and it's going to be a little bit different. Right.
Yeah.
It's all a matter. I love the example of the 85-year-old, because that's totally true.
Yeah.
And when you're older, these fleeting moments, even though they suck in while they're happening, and you're embarrassed and whatever you're feeling, if you were to ask yourself 50 years later, do I want to be in this situation right now? Of course you do, because you miss those moments. They're important moments. And like what you're saying is, take advantage of those moments.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and no, yeah, like you can always find something good in what feels like a shitty moment, right? There's always a teachable moment there.
Yep.
And that's with your kids. That's when you lose someone close to you, like you learn a lot. And it doesn't feel that way. You actually probably don't feel it until like years later, where you're like, oh, okay, now I got what like that was about for me.
Yeah. I
heard a good line that I think is kind of sums a lot of this up, which is like, especially when your kids are a little bit older, like and your kids are young, you're not having like a ton of deep conversations with them, but the goal of every conversation with your kid should be to have another conversation with your kid. So like a lot of the times, especially when your kids get older, parents want to be right. You think your kid's doing something that they shouldn't be doing, and better because you did that thing. But you like, do you want to be right? Or do you want to maintain a relationship? It's like always kind of the way to think about it. And even with your friends, you think about like, there are situations where you could be right, or you could let it go and preserve a very important relationship in your life. So I think that the tendency with parents, especially with other kids, is to like want to teach, want to explain stuff, want to be a mentor, want to help them not make the mistakes that they made. But the reality is like, they're going to. There's no way around that. It's like, we made stupid mistakes. Kids will make stupid mistakes. Our parents made stupid mistakes. And that's part of becoming a person. And so I think the key is always be thinking about like, sure, you could say a thing. You could let your emotions get the best of you and say a thing that you're going to regret. And at some point that could be the last conversation you have with your kid. Right. And like, that's something that would be horrific. Right. So you just never want to be in a position to do that, and always be like protecting against that downside risk, which is, like I want to have a good relationship with my kids. So everything I say to them should be like bound around respect and with that kind of principle. Now, obviously, if someone's like, hurting themselves or whatever, and it's acute, like, try and get them the help they need. I'm not suggesting like you let someone drive off a cliff, but I'm just saying in general, I think there's a tendency for us parents to want to do a lot more coaching and education to a fault, and like we just let our kids, we do a lot of like, you make me so whatever, and that's just really something you should never say to your kid, because they can't make you anything. That's you doing that.
Yep.
So project that onto them as
Adam, so one of the things that you just said, which I loved, is that the goal of every conversation is to have another conversation with your kids.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's just like, we have so many cases where there's, some parents, they struggle with their relationship with their kids. They say the wrong things. Their intentions are not communicated appropriately. And a lot of the times, like I was going to say before, and something else is, a lot of these hacks, you don't, I mean, you can use a support system, use a mental health professional to help give you tips and
Yeah.
methodologies on how to convey that message to a child and what you need to work on. But so often and so important is enjoy the quality of those conversations and make sure that you're being present and, again, quality over quantity. Have the right conversation, be respectful, just as like if your child was another human being
Yeah.
where you want to get treated the same way. So
Yeah.
I love that quote. I'm going to implement that. I'm stealing it from you or whoever you learned it from.
I stole it from somebody, so it's fair game.
I'm
Right.
sure it's in the juggle, right?
Yeah.
But I love that, and I just want to touch on that for one more second.
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, your relationship with your kid is or should be one of the most important relationships you have in your life. It's unfortunate that things get complicated with between parents and kids. I get it. I get things happen. But you have, and ultimately you can do everything you want to try and, change or control the trajectory of your kid. But in many ways, they're sort of like, they're going to do their thing. Like they're their own person. They're going to be heavily influenced by what happens in school, which you're not at, and whoever else they're hanging out with, because their chances are they're spending more time with their friends and at school than they are with you. So
Right.
that's what actually it's really important. We were talking about like having very little control over things in life. You
Mhm.
actually you've is like hard as this is to hear, you have very little control about like how your kid ends up.
Right.
Obviously, there are certain things you can do to instill, work ethic and resilience and you know being gracious, like and all these things that we think are important. If you don't do any of those things, your kid probably will have none of those qualities. But in general, like you have a concept of who your kid is, and they have a concept of who they are, and their concept is always going to win out. There are things you can do along the way to make sure that they check the right boxes. But so I think in that's like a big like disconnection point between parents and their kids is like, no, my kid should be here, but they're here. And so I think like one thing is, and this hopefully helps you not say something to your like not have a conversation with your kid that will be the last one, is just that like knowing that like for a long time you can have a heavy hand in what they do and whatever, and then at some point they're going to kind of chart their own path. And so I think like just being comfortable with like empowering them to be the kid that they want to be, assuming that's like they're not harming anyone, they're not harming themselves, being okay with that, and then just being supportive of that. Like there's a really good example I like of there's a story about Einstein's mom, and Einstein's mom made sure that their house was the opposite of school because he flunked school. Einstein was like a horrible student. He probably had ADHD. He probably had a variety of different issues when it came to learning in like a traditional environment. So his mom said, okay, we're going to do the opposite thing at home. I'm going to get you whatever you want. You want to color, you want to paint, like it's going to be available at home. And she
Right.
let the kid explore.
Mhm.
And ultimately, she got him a violin teacher, and he loved that. And later in life, some of his best theoretical physics ideas came to him while he was playing the violin. And the point is that like, you don't really know, like your kid isn't going to be you. You don't know who they're going to be. So try to empower as much exploration as possible and be okay with the fact that they're going to be like something different than whatever you want. And that should hopefully prevent a scenario in which you're forcing them into some box that they don't want to be in, and you're forcing conversations that you end up regretting.
Yeah, I mean, it also teaches, I mean, that story, I think, also teaches you how important like non-school life is and
Yeah.
the impact that you have at home and the support that you give them and the teachings at home and how you practice your household. I mean, to me, again, that's so important. Uh,
Yeah. I think, yeah, it's important to understand, like, especially for kids who are not neurotypical, which is many kids these days.
yeah,
school's probably never going to fill their cups up. So
Yeah.
trying to force a kid to get straight A's in a traditional learning environment is going to be absolute torture. And it's probably going to put that kid down a path that is not good for them or you. So we're pretty convinced, like, so my son is probably not going to be like, he's just like not going to do great in like a traditional learning environment. And we're prepared for that. And so we're like trying to figure out, okay, what are the things we could do at home outside of school? Like, how can we fill his cup up and make him understand that, like, hey, school is important because you get to meet your friends, you get to learn how to, like, create a schedule and do projects, and
Yeah.
it teaches you sort of like these like bigger skills in life. But for us, like, we don't care if you get straight A's. We care that you try hard. We care that you put in effort. We care that you're kind.
Yeah.
We care that, you listen. But it, I'm pretty convinced, like, yeah, he's not going to be the valedictorian because he's like not primed to learn in that environment, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't think that was like a concept that like our parents ever thought about. It was like that you go to school, you get straight A's, you go to
Right.
college,
That's right.
like, I think there's the cool thing about growing up today with your kids, like with your kids where they are, is like there is an unbelievable amount of source. There's information in a variety of different places and activities that didn't exist, where kids who don't fit into, like a traditional school setting can still get like joy and learning out of other places, whether that's YouTube or going to a coding academy or getting a tutor to play violin. So I just think that that's like a big thing, is thinking more about it from a context of like, I just want to empower my kid. I want them to be a decent human, but I want them to like, chart their own path.
Yeah.
And enabling that, because I think that will hopefully like pull away a lot of the opportunities in which you're going to be like demanding something from your kid that they're not willing to give.
Yeah. Let me ask you sort of another question that's related, but not. Understanding all the research you've done, your position, tell me about screen time.
Yeah.
Very controversial in my cases, two different parenting styles. My wife and I have different stances on parenting time, or not on parenting time, on screen time, right?
Yep.
Where's the hack man say his position on screen time?
Yeah. So it's funny. I just read a piece of academic research on this. And what it basically says is like, under the age of 18 months, your kid probably shouldn't be on a screen because they really need hands-on learning. It's not so much that like the screen boils their brain or anything. It's just more like those first 18 months are really about like your kid exploring and tactile, like and all the sensory coming in.
Yeah.
Once your kid's about 2, what the suggestion is basically like from 2 to 3 or 4, like you should probably stick to higher quality programming, anything PBS, Sesame Street. You should try your best to watch TV with your kids and help them, because like Sesame Street is very educational, but a 2-year-old's not like necessarily grasping all the concepts. So if you can chime in and be like, wait, how many was that? Or if you can kind of help them do a little bit of like call and response and help that, kind of like how you would if you're reading a book, like, why is this guy mad or whatever?
Yeah.
That's sort of the best way to do it. And then from 4 on, it's kind of like, less than an hour a day is what they recommend.
Yeah.
I think here's the reality though. Like it's done in an academic context. It's pretty removed from reality.
Yeah.
I know most parents are letting their kids watch way more than an hour a day, and that's okay. I think here's the point. Screen time is a tool in your toolkit. If it's the only tool in your toolkit, that's not good. Like you need other tools in your toolkit. Yeah. So if your kid is watching 6 hours of TV a day, that's bad. If your kid is watching an hour of TV a day, especially like what we like to do is we try to have like pre-planned times where the kids watch screens. So it's like, you've been at school all day. I get it. You're probably zonked. If you want to watch 30 minutes of TV while we get dinner together, because that's the only way it can happen, that's totally fine. And they know that's the time. Or like my son on, Saturdays and Sundays doesn't take a nap anymore, but he does like 45 minutes of quiet time in his room. He listens to a podcast or colors or whatever.
Yep.
And then he gets to watch an equal amount of screen time after that. So he kind of knows like this is a pre-planned time where I get to watch an hour of TV or whatever. Yeah. So I think that's like a big thing, is just making it somewhat predictable. At home, like we really try to avoid like putting a screen in front of our kids at dinner. I think that's like a really, dinners, it would be way easier if we did, but that's something we're really trying to keep as like a screen-free
Right.
1 hour, a window a day where all of us are very present. And I think,
Well, and Adam, like that, not to cut you off, but that's exactly what you were talking about. I mean, that was parenting hack one.
yeah, yeah,
Think about that, right? Like the 10, 12, 15 minutes that you actually have with your kids in
yeah,
meaningful time after they get picked up from school or daycare. I mean, to divert them to a screen may be helpful for you to do whatever you need to do and like recalibrate yourself.
yeah, yeah.
But I mean, that 10 minutes is, I mean, that's gold.
Yeah, totally. So I think that's a big thing. It's just like thinking about it like if all my kid is doing is watching a screen, that's not good. If my
Right.
kid is watching a screen for 30 minutes a day, I mean, especially if your kid's going to a daycare that follows a true like an educational program, like
Yeah.
they're getting a lot of they're getting a lot of input. They're getting a ton of like knowledge dropped on them throughout the day.
Right.
And I like to think about it a lot of times like you work a 10-hour day, you come home and all you want to do is like sit on the couch and zone out and maybe watch something.
Right.
That's how I feel as an adult. So I can imagine my kid when he comes home from keeping it together all day at daycare,
Yeah.
comes home and just wants to sit down and not be taught something. And that I think is totally fine. So
Yeah.
I think like that's the key. You're not always going to be able to sit down and like walk through the show with your kid, and that's fine.
Right.
I think it's one tool in your toolkit. And I think that that's the big thing. And also like, sure, every once in a while we go out to dinner as a family and it's easier to put an iPad on for them.
Sure.
And that's,
Yeah.
or like on Friday nights, the kids like to do a movie night. So we'll put dinner on the table, like on the coffee table in front of the TV, and we'll do that, like once a week. So I think it's just like there are kind of like, building in some regularity around when you watch screens, helping them understand that like, okay, Friday night's a special night. We'll do it, this one night of the week. And
Yeah.
there being kind of like a ritual around it, I think is good. And then in general, just trying to like limit it as much as you can. But I get like for some people, it's just not as easy, especially if you're a single parent or whatever, like, and you've got a couple kids, like it's easy for me. We've got 2 parents, 2 kids. It's easy for me to say like, oh, this is like the perfect way to do it. And I don't think there's a right way. I just think it's like most things, it's being mindful, it's moderation, and then it's trying to help a kid understand like this is when we watch TV and this is when we don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even just broader, this concept of consistency, routine, expectations, you know what I mean?
And I also think a lot of it with the screens is just like the content too. So like
right.
there is a lot of garbage out there. That's literally just like visual crack.
Yeah. I've seen it. Yeah.
And like that's what Cocomelon is like, and that's why kids love Cocomelon. I've been at like a get together with parents and kids, and like the parents are equally as sucked into Cocomelon because it is just
they've got the algorithm.
Yeah, they like
it's the same as like
it's bright colors, it's quick cuts. It's
my kid here, he had watched the truck wheel running over all the stuff and the stuff exploding, like the toothpaste, and
yeah. So I think like what we've tried to do actually, there are a couple cool hacks you can do with YouTube Kids and with Netflix where you can basically just like make shows disappear. So like when we turn on Netflix at home, Cocomelon's just not there anymore.
Yeah.
And neither is Blippi, just because I find them annoying.
Yeah.
But like, so a lot, you can actually sort of create your kids' content environment. YouTube Kids is even better. You can they can be inside the YouTube Kids app and like scroll through it, but it's only content that you've selected. So it seems like they're like, picking it, but you've picked it.
Right.
So there are ways, I think my kids are 4.5 and 3. So it's hard for me to know what it's like for an 8-year-old and how you manage them.
Yeah.
But we found there were certain things that like gave my son nightmares. So we're like, okay, let's get rid of that. And a lot of these things, it's funny, like you think about, oh, this is going to be a big deal if I get rid of this, but it hasn't been, especially if we've helped like explain why. So it's like, hey, we were watching that show and you seemed really scared and you said you were having bad dreams about it. So maybe we should just take a break on that. We can try again in a year. It's like, okay, fine. Right. Or like Cocomelon, we were like, oh no, like took away Cocomelon. Is everyone gonna freak out? It just, it appeared. And then like, there was 100 other shows to watch. Right. So like, I think some of the time it's like, definitely have a conversation with them if it's like causing an issue. And then other times there's things that just aren't that big of a deal. And there's so much content out there now, you can easily replace something like kids in general like watching TV because it's just like same reason we like watching TV. It's like visually pleasant and it's easy and it's mental load off. So whether that's usually like if it's Daniel Tiger or Cocomelon, Daniel Tiger is obviously way better. And if that's the only thing that's available, your kid's not going to be like, oh, I don't want to watch TV at all. Just be
Yeah.
like, no, I'll watch this because it's TV and it's still better than whatever I was going to do. So I think that's like a big thing is just just being kind of thoughtful about it.
Yeah. And I mean, Ed, and we're running out of time, but I guess what I want to kind of do is just bring it all the way up, because a lot of what we've talked about, it's kid centric, it's little kid centric, and really it's almost like it's just thinking about those common sense elements. But again, I'll go back to the quote that you used, which was the goal of every conversation is to have another conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of the things that you've told us and sort of brought to light have global applicability to almost children of any age, even adults that you're with, that you're partners with, that you're friends with, that's your family. I mean, really, it's speak to those who you want to, how you want to be spoken to,
Mm-hmm.
right? Afford the level of respect, attention, and detail to your relationships that you want to cultivate, right? And be mindful of how you're approaching situations, because just like kids, regardless really of their age, modeling is so important in terms of how to move, in terms of what you want, how to steer them, and what you're expecting in return.
Yeah, I think that's all spot on. And one thing I'll just like say last point is, and this applies to like even high school kids, know that behavior is communication. So like when your kid's 4, they pretty much can't tell you what they want to tell you. So they're going to freak out.
Right.
And so it's up to you to kind of be a detective and figure out what is the thing that's causing this angst.
Yeah.
So know that like your kid, whether they're 4 or 14, when they're freaking out, generally they're not trying to give you a hard time. It's because they're having a hard time, and it's up to you to figure out what that is. And that can be really tricky and hard. And you just be like why, just it can be like the sort of thing where it's like, just tell me what you want. But just know that like in general, like the behavior is like, so like for us, a lot of times we know when our kid starts asking a ton of questions, he's anxious about something. He's never asking questions about the thing he's anxious about. So it's up to us to be like, but like, it seems like you're having a hard time with something. Are you scared of something? And then after some prying, you could be like, oh yeah, like we're supposed to do this thing today. Like, I don't know what it's going to be like. It's like, okay, let's talk through that.
Yeah.
So obviously that changes when a kid's 14, but the like still the same idea, which is like, 14-year-old isn't like, their brain's still not done developing. So they're not going to be like, what, I'm having a really hard time with this thing, and here's why. Can you help me through it? It's going to be like, no, they're going to be awful to you. Right. And it's not because they're an awful person. It's because they're having a hard time with something and they don't know how to communicate that. So it's up to you to kind of pull it out. So I think like the big thing in general is just like realizing behavior is communication, and how so you want to be the person that your kid later in life comes to when they have a problem. You don't want to be the person who is like, I can't share that. Like, we don't have that relationship. And so that's all of this is like you're laying the foundation to be able to do that, like with, good communication, and with kind of being consistent and trying to be as stoic as you can, and just trying to be like a person that like your kid can trust.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're getting to that place later in life, which is like, hey dad, I'm in a situation that I do not feel comfortable in, and I need you to come pick me up.
Right.
Like that would be
those conversations. I've had those conversations, right?
Right. Like, and that's the dream. Like you want your kid to be able to feel comfortable enough to do that, because most kids do not. And I knew plenty of kids that I grew up with who did not. I did.
Yep. And
I didn't realize that until now that like I'm a parent. Like, wow, that was like a unbelievable gift that my parents gave me, which is like to be like, hey, no matter what happens, even if like you get yourself in a bad situation, you call me, and you're like, you won't be in trouble. We'll come pick you up, and then we'll figure out what happens. So that's like a big thing.
Well, that's all awesome. And I so appreciate, Adam, you kind of joining up with me and kind of educating my listeners and we're going through tough times, and just normal people that have children and are struggling with tantrums at Target. So I love it. It's awesome content. Everybody listening should subscribe to The Juggle.
It's just you can go to getthejuggle.com, all one word, and just simply just plug in your email, and you'll get it every Sunday.
Yep. And Adam, if anyone wanted to get in contact with you, what would be the best way to do that, either through Instagram or otherwise?
Yeah. So on Instagram, this one word, working parent, and then an underscore. So @working parent_. So you can find me there. If you subscribe to the Juggle, I mean, I basically you can send an email back to any of those emails and you'll get to me. So I read all of them. And in the welcome email, I ask you to email me. So it's me on the other end. So the email for that is hello@getthejuggle. If you want to just send me an email. But yeah, once you subscribe, you can basically reply to any of those emails. It will come to me. So you can either get me on Instagram or via the email.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Adam, thank you again so much, and really cool connecting with you again.
Yeah, this was fun. Thank you.
All right, man, you got it.